Michigan is not just, you think you know, one of the most challenged states, the most challenged state in the country. And so I appreciate the chance to come and talk to you about the perspective of a governor from the laboratories of democracy. Because Michigan has had the most challenged economy, I think we are an interesting place from which to learn. And of course, if we're talking about empowerment, the two strategies that are most important to empower citizens really are education and job creation. And for us in Michigan, the questions, both on the education side and on job creation, have been particularly acute because for 100 years, we have proudly been a manufacturing capital, the auto capital of the globe. For 100 years, people could go from high school to factory. They didn't have to have college degrees to have a good middle-class life. And so the question is for Michigan and for states like Michigan that are concentrated in sectors where we are seeing this global shift in manufacturing jobs to low-wage countries, what do we do? So let me just give you a little bit of perspective. We were talking about when it hit me that Michigan needed desperately to diversify. Now, Michigan, because we have 7 times more automotive employment than all of the other states, for years and years we had talked about diversifying. When the auto industry took a dip, then people said, we've got to diversify. And then the auto industry would come back and people would forget about it. Well, in 2003, at the end of 2003, I got a call from the vice president of our Michigan Economic Development Corporation, and he said, Governor, we've got a real crisis on our hand. And I said, what is it? He said, there's a little community in Michigan called Greenville. And that little community has 8,000 people as residents. And in that little community, for 100 years, they have been the refrigerator capital. And they have organized and grown their community around one factory. That factory is an Electrolux factory. It employs 2,700 people of this 8,000-person town. So as you can imagine, grandparents and children maybe don't work there anymore, but everybody else worked at the factory. What is the problem, I said to the vice president of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. He said, our problem is that Electrolux has decided to move to Mexico. And I said, well, let's just go and see what incentives we can put on the table to combat this. So we took our development team and everybody else in the community into a room about this size with not quite as many people, but the mayor was there and the city manager was there and the head of the community college was there and the head of the workforce, the UAW represented the workers. Everybody was there, the Chamber of Commerce, and we all sort of shook out our pockets and put our chips on the table and said, what have you got? What have you got? What have you got? So we put on the table 0 taxes for 20 years. We offered to build a new factory for Electrolux. The workers at the UAW put on the table at that time unprecedented concessions. They didn't even want us to tell anybody what they were doing because they didn't want others to get the idea. The workforce, the community college said, we're going to retrain all of your workers. We made this pile of incentives and we pushed it across the table to the management of Electrolux. And they looked at our pile and they said, wow, that is so generous. We have never been given that level of incentives before. But, they said, there is nothing you can do to compensate for the fact that we will be able to pay $1.57 an hour in Mexico. There's nothing you can do. Now, this causes us to reel, of course, because if there's nothing we can do, 0 taxes, all of the talk about tax policy, driving employer decisions, it's all out the window when you're talking about a global economy. So I went to the National Governors Association just about that time where we have our meetings of all the governors. And at that time, the head of the association was Gary Locke, who is now head of President Obama's Department of Commerce. And he was introducing all the new governors, and I was a new governor. We came in with a whole new crop. And we were all supposed to get up in front of a group like this and say what we had been doing for the past year. And we had all been in office 1 year, so all these governors were getting up, telling their accomplishments. And my head is still stuck in Greenville. And I'm still thinking, oh my God, what does this mean? And so I get up and I tell the story of Greenville. And I get to the point where Greenville pulls out and everybody stopped eating. And Gary Lott comes up and he says, Governor, that is a horrible story. Because he says, what does it mean for manufacturing in America? Right? And then he pulls me aside and he says, Governor, next time I tell you to tell one of your successes, can you tell one of your successes? At any rate, so a few months later, I'm invited to a gathering that the Greenville employees held. And it was called... It was the week that the last refrigerator came off the assembly line. So they were gathering at the end of this horrible period, and they called this dinner the Last Supper. It was at a big place in Greenville called Clackle's Orchard Pavilion. And I went into the pavilion, and there were hundreds and hundreds of families, and they had little checkered cloths, and they were eating out of box lunches, and there was a band playing. And I went to the first table, and one of the workers comes up to me, and he has two teenage kids, and he says, Governor, I'm 48 years old. And he had a baseball cap on and tattoos, and he said, Governor, I'm 48 years old. Here are my kids. He said, I've worked at this factory for 30 years. My father worked at this factory. My grandfather worked at this factory. I went from high school to factory. Then he put his hand on his chest and he said, so, who is going to hire me? That who is going to hire me question has been asked in communities large and small all across America with the movement of these manufacturing jobs. And so the question is for us, what are we going to do about it? So we coalesced with economists. We did everything we could to determine what does Michigan have to do to shake the blanket and completely reform, both short-term and long-term. The first thing is to double the number of college graduates. And in fact, lessons from Greenville, there's just two. One is that this is too big for one leader to do, and I say this when everybody expects the President of the United States to wave a magic wand and fix the economy, realizing that this is all of our problem, right? It's not just one person's. So you have to enlist others, you have to empower others, and you have to educate people. And the second is you have to diversify through public-private partnerships in this environment. And I'll get to that in just one second. So the lessons from Greenville and from the Last Supper is that we have to upskill particularly adult workers because we have this generation of workers in their 30s, 40s, and 50s in this country that didn't have to go to college and now find themselves without options, right? So we created something in Michigan. This is an example of empowering and enlisting others. We created something called No Worker Left Behind, where the workers who have been unemployed or who are working at McDonald's maybe and are underemployed, we will pay for their tuition to go back to a community college or to go to college for the first time, which is many of them, and to get a degree or a certification in an emerging sector. And we had identified all of the emerging sectors in Michigan. Here's the catch, though. We would pay for the tuition, and this is in large measure in partnership with the federal government, but we would pay for their tuition, but they couldn't agree to be trained or get a degree in, say, political science or French. Those were my degrees, so I can say that. They had to agree to be trained in healthcare or in entrepreneurship or in renewable energy, those kind of things. Now, if you pay for it, they will come. And consequently, we've had 140,000 adults enroll in No Worker Left Behind. And of those, 4 times more than the national average. Of those who have gotten new jobs or gotten an upgrade in their jobs, 75% are employed now, which is great in this environment. Michigan has a 13.1% unemployment rate, which is very good, and it's better than the national average. That's the adults. And then the The kids, our big, hairy, audacious goal, our BHAG, was to double the number of college graduates in Michigan because we had a very low college graduation rate. That meant to up the standards, of course, all the way through. And I'll talk about that in 1 second. And I'm going to go fast here because I know we've got to move. Training workers at quadruple the national rate. I just mentioned that, all those workers who got a job. Now, on the K through 12 side, in 2005, we instituted our higher standards. And so, as a result, all grades increasing in math proficiency. Now we've got a little bit of a track record from 2005 through 2009. All grades increase in reading proficiency, even with the tougher curriculum, which is what everybody freaked out about, because every child now in high school must take a college prep curriculum in Michigan. Every child, 4 years of math, 3 years of science, 4 years of English, a foreign language, an online learning experience. Many of the educators were nervous that an Algebra 2 requirement in high school would cause dropouts, right? Not happening. We saw our dropout rate from 15% down to 11.3%. Why? Because we changed policy, and the community reacted, and therefore the results ended up happening. And what we were seeing is community colleges enrollment is up by 35%. A lot of that is because of the adults coming back in through No Worker Left Behind. And our university enrollment is also up. That's a little bit of a lagging indicator because all these kids are just now coming through with the higher standards in the college prep curriculum. But the colleges are saying that their enrollment is at record levels. Great. We still have a long way to go, but that's an important aspect of what we are doing to empower our citizens, both kids and adults. The second thing, quickly, that I want to just touch on is the policy changes that are necessary to create jobs in America. And I just want to use energy as an example. In this country, because of our history of manufacturing and of engineering and of solving problems, we can lead the world and we can create jobs if we have the right policy in place. And this is just an example. 2007, we adopted a new energy law in Michigan, sends the right market signals. And in 2009, we adopted, in parallel with the Obama administration, incentives for solar, wind, and battery companies to come to Michigan. Incentives, both tax incentives as well as grants and credits. As a result of the incentives and the change of policy creating demand in Michigan, in the past 2 years, since 2008, we have gotten 47 companies to come to Michigan or expand in Michigan in bio, wind, solar, and advanced battery, creating now this is over the next decade, 89,000 jobs over the next decade and an investment of $9.4 billion. Why? Because the right policy was put in place. It's great. You're supposed to all go, oh, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. And that's just so far. And we are not slowing down. The battery section alone, of course, the lithium-ion battery for the electrification of the vehicle. 1 year ago, or in August of last year, the Vice President came and announced the grants that would be given to the companies in America who were building batteries. Michigan, out of all of the places, because of our state incentives, we had more of the grants than anywhere. But since that one, just in that one sector alone, 17 battery companies have come to Michigan in 1 year, the projection to create 63,000 jobs. I'm just saying. The policy that the federal government needs to adopt to create jobs and manufacturing jobs, advanced manufacturing jobs in America are, one, we have to have a federal energy bill that sends the right market signals so that these employers will decide to locate here. Without that, we are just shooting with pea bullets, in the wind. We are just, I don't know if that's a terrible metaphor, but I don't even know what I mean by that. But you get my drift, right? I know you're all eating, too. I meant those little bullets. Anyway, but we also have to have the federal incentives to generate demand not just on the supply side, but on the demand side. So for example, with the electrification of the vehicle, the early batteries cost more. We know we see this with computers. It's the same thing with batteries. They started out at costing $35,000 per battery. They're down to $15,000, then $12,000. The early adopters need to have some incentives to be able to commercialize this and take it to scale. The federal government can be a partner in that. It's happening all around the globe. We've got to make sure that we are in the game too and have robust incentives to get this technology and, most importantly, these jobs here. Federal incentives as well in terms of direct investment in research and development, access to capital for retooling plants. We got all of these great suppliers to the auto industry, but it's expensive to invest in the machines that are necessary to be able to create those jobs. Upfront capital in loans and credits that can be paid back, very, very necessary. And then I would say as well, content requirements, and that means that in exchange for a loan or a grant, you got to build in America. In exchange for a state loan or a grant, you got to build in that state and have those jobs created here. All right, I'm going to just stop this because I know we got another speaker, but my last slide is these two smiley guys. And the reason why I put them up here is because the guy on the left is George Bosonic. He is the city manager for Greenville. And the guy on the right is Pete Haynes, and he is the superintendent of Greenville. And why are they smiling? Because when Electrolux left, we said we were going to live up to Greenville's name. We attracted 2 solar plants, United Solar Ovonics, that is there now. Look at, I've got my little unisolar solar panel that I carry in my little pocket here. Wait, what happened? Can you go back one? Did I knock that? I'm sorry, this is Rajiv's. Is this my hook? Yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm going as fast as I can. But let me just say, in Greenville, we got 2 plants. They're great. It hasn't made up totally for the lost jobs at Electrolux, but they're standing in front of a municipal building. It's actually at the airport. They have decided that Greenville is going to be the first city in Michigan to go entirely off the grid, at least the municipal building. So they're putting all of these solar panels that are manufactured by their citizens on their grid, and they intend to make money at it because we changed policy to allow them to be energy entrepreneurs and sell it back to the electric company. So policy matters.